you don't have the crossing over prayer, ask for an angel to come and take this person to the heaven world right now. It can be that simple. You don't have to do some bizarre ritual. It's the purity of love and compassion from your heart that helps the soul in front of you.
Hi friends, this is Read and Write with Natasha podcast. My name is Natasha Tynes and I'm an author and a journalist. In this channel, I talk about the writing life, review books, and interview authors. Hope you enjoy the journey. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Read and Write with Natasha. So today we have with us Tina Erwin. Tina Erwin is a ghost helper. So what does that supposed to mean? Let's see. She is passionate about being a ghost helper, teaching the living to help the dead. She wants to empower us all to help all ghosts. This is the compassion we want for ourselves by using the crossing over prayer. Tina has studied metaphysics all her life, gaining insight into the mystical world of magic and spirituality. She is the author of 8 books on metaphysics. Her writing comes from an intense desire to know and understand the hard science behind the unseen world of action and reaction, combined with a sincere desire to share this understanding with other knowledge seekers. Wow. Okay. Hi, Tina. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Natasha, for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Of course. First question, do you feel ghosts around us now?
Not necessarily. I have the uncanny ability to turn it on and off. Otherwise, you're kind of inundated wherever you go.
Oh, wow. This is fascinating. So before I start inundate you with questions, I want you to just tell us about your books. And what was the reaction when you tell people you actually see ghosts and you help the ghosts to cross over? So let's start with the books and how people reacted to them.
Well, I've written 8 books. Started with a grief book because my 6-year-old niece sat on the sofa next to my sister and died. She literally dropped dead in front of my sister. And I have the ability to remote view. So I remote viewed it and I'm talking to my niece as a ghost, which was a completely surreal experience for me. And, you know, the last time I saw her, she's this happy, bubbly 6-year-old. And the next thing I know, I'm talking to her ghost who's refusing to go back into her body and telling me it's over. And I wrote a grief book, The Lightworker's Guide to Healing Grief, because I realized everywhere we went, someone was grieving something. And people are grieving a parent, a loss of a job, your house burns down, a tornado hits you, a family member is murdered. There's just a million kinds of grief. So that's why the grief book was written. And then I've been dealing with ghosts pretty much all my life, even though I spent 20 years in the Navy. I still help people with ghosts on subtle levels. And I wrote a series of 3 books called Ghost Stories from the Ghost's Point of View. And this offers the reader a view of what is it like to be dead? What's predecessor energy? And how does it feel to be in the same space in the same time with a ghost? And how does the ghost impact the living? And how does that manifest? And when I started writing these books, and my daughters-in-law said, you've got to start telling people about this. They were the ones, I have 2 daughter-in-laws. And they each said, this is so important for people to understand. And they use the tools that I created so that they don't need me all the time if something happens with them or their children. And those books have had quite a bit of success. And the volume 3 is a particularly interesting volume because it's about things that happened to me personally from the time I was first married. And I've been married just at 50 years. Be 50 years in October. And all that time, so many things happened that I wanted to share with people that if someone says they see a ghost, they're not crazy, that the energy that animates us doesn't die with us. We don't become compost. We'll go back to the physics of energy is neither created nor destroyed. That's a law of physics. We know that. So what happens to the soul, that part of us that's animated, when the physical body is exhausted from living or dies in an accident or the person takes their own life? What happens? And so what these books do is give you a sorry, let me clear my throat a little bit. What happens when you discover that there is life after death? I mean, atheists are so shocked. They can't believe it. And then I look around at all the cultures of the world, how they honor their dead, whether it's Tibetan culture or culture in India or Native American cultures. Every culture honors the dead and remembers their ancestors. And the issue of ghosts has been around for eternity. There's never been a time people didn't talk about ghosts throughout recorded and unrecorded history, in all of the tellings of the stories. So instead of being afraid of the dead or afraid of a ghost or not understanding what you're seeing, let's throw some light on the subject. That's why I'm so grateful to you for giving me this opportunity.
Wow, Tina, I have a lot of questions. I don't know where to start. Okay, so I'm going to start with, you mentioned the incident of your niece. I'm so sorry about your niece. So did you actually see her pass away in front of you, or you heard about it?
It was my sister. My sister called me. I was in the grocery store.
Okay.
And this was in 2003, and I just gotten a cell phone. I barely knew how to use it.
Okay.
And my youngest son said, your sister's been trying to reach you. What's something's going on? She's frantic. And my niece was 6 years old. She died of group A strep. And it's such a silent killer. You never know when it happens. But group A strep is an exit strategy. And I know that's going to sound funny to people, but sometimes we're not meant to live 100 years. Sometimes we're only meant to live 6 years or 15 years or 2 hours. And the soul doesn't need 100 years of experiences. The soul may only need what it needs, and then it returns, and then that soul leaves. And the more I studied life after her death, the more I realize how important understanding this is. It helps people grieve. It helps to remove guilt. And it helps people with the whole concept of dying and death. People are so afraid. Imagine the compassion we can offer people by helping them understand what happens after death, or what happens when you die, or what is the dying process, which is universal for all mortal people. You have a question, I can hear it.
Yeah. So when did you see her? When did you see her ghost after she told you? Like your sister calls you, she tells you, my daughter just passed away, right?
She said, can you remote view her and tell her to get back in her body? And so I rushed home and I started remote viewing her. And I could see her in the emergency room with her arm around her older sister. And she's watching everyone try to revive her. And I said, Ariana, you have to get back in your body. You can't imagine the grief we're all going to feel. And she said, Aunt Tina, it's over. I'm done. I'm not going back in the body. It's over. And I argued with her for a good 30 minutes. Remember, and at the point I'm having this conversation, it's been 2 hours since she took a breath. And she said, it's over. I'm not going back. I'm done. And it was such a powerful shock for me that I had to call my sister and say, it's over. And because she said, they've been working for 2 hours nonstop on this child, and there is no life sign. Her heart hasn't restarted. All the brain waves are dead. Tell me it's over. And I said, it's over. She's not coming back. And then they stopped working on her. It was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had. And I was able to help my sister understand it. But the shock of it dropped my frequency. And for a person who works on the other side, helping the living and the dead, and doing psychic things, you've got to keep your frequency high. When your frequency drops because of shock or grief or severe illness, your psychic ability can be greatly diminished. So the need to keep your frequency high, live a very clean, stable life is very important if you're doing service to others, service for others. And so I called one of my brothers and I told him, and he said, "Oh my God, we have to cross this child over immediately." Well, my frequency was too low, so he had to help me. And we did cross her over. And her grandfather, who had died the previous year, met her. He got down on one knee, and I watched her just be completely embraced by the light and her grandfather hugging her and kissing her. And they walked hand in hand, and the scene closed, and I didn't see anymore. I'm not allowed to see anymore. And it was so moving, and it gave because my brother-in-law is one of the finest men you'd ever want to meet. Gave my brother-in-law and my sister and my remaining niece a feeling of closure. They know where she is. She crossed over. They know that her grandfather met her. And there is, in your staggering grief at the loss of a child, there is some element of peace in understanding this. So that's what happened.
So how long have you been seeing ghosts? Like, when did you realize that you have that ability? At what age?
I was about 7.
What happened?
My Siamese died.
And
I kept seeing her ghost throughout the house.
okay.
And well, actually, it was probably when I was 2.5, because I had a playmate named Sarah, who I still remember. And we lived in a house way out in the country. And Sarah went with me everywhere. But when we moved, Sarah didn't come. And my mother didn't notice that. She thought I had an imaginary friend.
Yeah.
I couldn't have made this kid up. I couldn't have made her up. And she didn't come with us. Imaginary friends, if they're truly imaginary, they go with your child everywhere. But when we left the house, even to go to a grocery store, Sarah didn't come. And my mother never noticed the difference because she dismissed a child. She dismissed me for that. Not because my mother was a bad person. She wasn't. It never occurred to her that there was a ghost in the house. But the house was really old. And I think the child died of something in the house. So,
has she ever believed you? Has she ever believed you, or did she remain skeptic all her life?
She eventually believed me because she bought a house in North Carolina, and it had been on land that was used by Native Americans. And I didn't say the word owned because Native Americans didn't own property. They used the land and they moved so they didn't exhaust the land. I'm making that differentiation because Native Americans had a respect for the land. So I'm being very careful about that. And my mother kept seeing these people. So she thought she was imagining it, but she wasn't imagining it. And I was able to cross those people over. And then all the things my mother was seeing stopped completely. It's like she was free after that.
When you say crossover, what do you do when you cross them over?
I do something that anyone on earth can do. And I use something called the crossing over prayer. And on ghosthelpers.com, the prayer is there, and it's free for anyone who wants to say it for a loved one. You can also get crossing over prayer cards, which a lot of people who have psychic children certainly do use those cards. If you don't have the crossing over prayer, ask for an angel to come and take this person to the heaven world right now. It can be that simple. You don't have to do some bizarre ritual. It's the purity of love and compassion from your heart that helps the soul in front of you. And it makes a staggering difference for that soul. Because a lot of times when someone dies, they move into the 4th dimension and it's dark there. And so how do I know that? How do we know it's dark? Because the 23rd Psalm tells us in every culture on earth, every religious tradition on earth has a version of the 23rd Psalm. In my years and years of research, I discovered that. I was shocked by that. Problem is the Christian community thinks theirs is the only one, the only way. But all spiritual traditions have a beauty to them and a merit to them. And they all are concerned for those who die. It's a natural process. We're so afraid of it, but it's a natural process when it's not violent. And when a person dies, they move into the fourth dimension. Lo, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why would you be afraid? For thou art with me, meaning God is with you. But people who have lost faith in anything, because a lot of organized religion is so detrimental to people, filling them with guilt and fear and shame, that they forget to separate religion from God. They can be different things. And when you bring that concept together, that there's no religion in the afterlife. In the heaven world, there's no Buddhist or Baptist or Hindu or Jewish religion. There's just God, this beautiful, warming, welcoming light, and beings who welcome you and help you understand the life you just lived. Answer your questions. I have a lot of questions when it's my turn to cross over. And all of those things help us to heal. But a lot of people are so filled with guilt or shame, or they died in such a violent way, they don't find that light. And many of them come back quickly from that dimension, and they have nothing resolved. When you move into the light, you're given healing for whatever caused your death or the trials of mortal life. Some people live such a hard life. I mean, we've all seen them. They've struggled. They've been fearful. Some people are terrified that they're cursed. When they die and you cross them over into that life, all of those feelings leave them. And they are given the peace and the comfort, but above all, the love they may never have received in mortal life. It's the greatest gift a living person could offer any soul. I'm sorry, I'm kind of on my soapbox here.
No, I'm listening. I'm actually curious about you with this knowledge and this, let's say, gift. How did you grow up being different than the other kids, let's say at school or at work? You said you served at the Navy, and thank you for your service. And so, how was your childhood? Did kids bully you? Did you even mention it to other kids? How did you grow up having this talent?
Well, I didn't consider it a gift. When you have psychic ability at increasingly sophisticated levels, is because you've worked at it life after life after life.
Okay.
And in each life, you hone the skill. It's like child prodigies. You see them in all cultures of the world. I mean, India certainly has their share of genius children in math, engineering, music, science, art. I mean, you see these kids all over the world, every culture, every race. And they have honed these skills life after life after life after life after life. So growing up, I didn't know I was different, and I didn't talk about it. Once I started seeing the Siamese ghost and nobody else could see her, I just didn't talk about it anymore. And I'm the oldest of 4 kids, so I was really busy helping my mother with the younger children, but I just didn't see the world the way everybody else saw it. And I just watched how people behaved. I have a master's degree in management, and I minored in sociology and psychology, and I have a degree in industrial relations. So I'm kind of all over the map. But when you are studying just ordinary things, and then you start studying extraordinary things, and you start putting them together with science, not in a way that's, I don't know, parochial or ordinary, but in a way that lifts you up, and you start seeing beyond what people tell you, or you realize you're listening to a conversation and you hear the rest of the sentence that wasn't said, or you can see what's coming in the future and you know what's going to happen. And sometimes you can do something about it and sometimes you can't. So you start to understand that you're different. And I was fortunate enough to come in with some level of wisdom that enabled me to know how to diplomatically handle the ability that I have. A gift you can give back. You can't give this back. I'm supposed to use this ability to help others. That's the whole point of having it. It's not to flip cards or tell futures, or it's simply to be of service to anyone who needs it within my capability. And if I'm not the right person, I'll tell you, I'm not the right person. I can only help to a certain degree. So
Okay.
I'm really careful about that.
So let's see. So you never told anyone, like you never told your best friend in, elementary school, or a boyfriend, or
No.
What about your husband?
Well, my husband discovered it within the first year we were married. He was the love of my life, and I knew I had been married to him before. And he's still the love of my life after 50 years. Isn't that great? He discovered that I was super psychic in so many ways. And he used that psychic ability over the years to help him stay in a safe place. And you actually see that in a lot of the ghost books, because I refer to my husband, especially in book 3. There's some astounding stories regarding him. And I've saved his life, I don't know how many times, because I would say, don't do this or do this. And if you do this, you're going to die, and this is how you're going to die. And he would listen to me. That's why we're still together, because God bless him, he listened. He's a good man. So I have memory of our past lives together, how each of us died. So I have a range of abilities, but they're not perfect, and they're not 100% of the time. You're allowed to do what you're allowed to do in a given moment. And you're always conscious of the fact that you have to obey spiritual law when it comes to psychic ability. And I don't know if anyone has ever spoken. Most people don't talk about that. But when you have psychic ability, you are bound by spiritual law.
And how do you find out about these laws? Where are they written?
The spiritual laws are also laws of physics. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, as above, so below. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, which is the definition of karma. We know that. An awful lot of cultures have talked about, karma and reincarnation. But there are more subtle ones, like I have the ability to remote view. But I don't run around remote viewing everything because it's exhausting. When someone says, oh, I want you to go remote view my neighbor because he owes me money. I had that request several years ago. I want you to go into his brain. I want you to make him do this for me. It's like, no, I'm not. I cannot violate someone else's free will. I can't offer anything to someone without that person's permission. And you cannot just ask spirit. Doesn't work that way. The individual has to give you permission. It's very challenging. If someone says, can you remote view my house and clear my house? I've had a whole bunch of those requests this week. I have to have the permission of the homeowners. So if you have 2 people who own the home, both people have to give permission.
I see.
So the wife can't say, well, I don't want to tell my husband. I'm sorry. But if I'm remote viewing your home at night and your husband happens to sense or feel like there's somebody there and he freaks out and stumbles or falls, I earn the karma for that. Now, if the person lies to me, well, that's another matter. But I am really specific. No, that person has to give permission.
Okay.
And they go, okay, all right. Well, because if you don't, and that's one time, I can't just keep going back to somebody's house. It's like every time you go to somebody's house, you knock on the door. If you burst in, that's breaking and entering. It's no different with psychic ability. There are civil laws and spiritual laws, and a lot of times they match each other.
So I think I mentioned the story to you before we started recording, but last week I was sitting with a bunch of friends at the pool, and I don't know why I asked the questions, but I said, do you believe in ghosts? And all of them said no, all of them. And so as you can tell, there are lots of skeptics out there, and I started like, yeah, what about haunted houses? And they all started laughing, and it was like a joke, right? And I'm sure you face lots of skeptics, and people say, oh, maybe you're just, maybe you're depressed, maybe you need some medication. I'm sure you get that. How do you handle the skeptics?
Actually, no one ever says that to me.
Oh, really? Okay.
No.
Okay.
I have people who are honest and say, I don't believe in ghosts. And I'll say, I can certainly respect that.
Okay.
In Ghost Stories from the Ghost Point of View, Volume 1, there's the story of the rocket scientist. And he is a rocket scientist for NASA, and he worked at Langley in Virginia. He probably still works there. And he says, I think my house is haunted, but I don't believe in ghosts. I said, dude, you called a psychic. Either you want me to help you or you don't. And I said, so what makes you think your house is haunted? Every day when I leave, I turn off all the lights. And when I come home, my front light is on. I had the electrician look at it. I've done everything. And every time I come back, the light's on. And then my girlfriends, I'm dating all these different women, and, they are completely freaked out. They say someone blows in their face or pinches them or yanks their hair. And I tell them there's no such things as ghosts, and they all get mad at me. And one of them was close to slapping me, and, they ran out of my house. And, well, in other words, just because you don't believe in it, you're being disrespectful to someone who does believe it. And he said, so somebody gave me your number and said, I should talk to you. Can you remove a ghost? And I said, well, let me see what I find. I don't know. Let's try it. And he had, in Virginia, there were 4,000 battles in the Civil War in the Southern United States, especially Virginia. 2,000 of those battles took place in Virginia. And if there wasn't a battlefield near you, there were people who were starving to death because of the Civil War in the South. So that piece of property that this guy had in Norfolk was the home of a woman who had 4 daughters. Her husband joined the Civil War and it never came back. And so she was trying to keep the 5 of them alive. They lived through the Civil War. And Lincoln was assassinated in April of 1865. And right after the Civil War ended, he didn't live very long after that. And when that happened, it was going to change a lot of things. But for this woman, she was thrilled that Lincoln died. So I'm reviewing the property, and she just appears. I mean, I go back through what are called stacks of time, like strata of Earth. You can see how time is because the Earth shows you. Well, that's true in each of those stacks of time, like rings on a tree. Events took place in each of those rings, and that's predecessor energy. And when you're looking at this, then you realize that sometimes that predecessor energy is imposing on the current living people. This case was interesting because, one, this woman knew she was dead, but she was influencing a living person in modern times. That part was unusual because a lot of times I've had situations where the ghost has no idea that they are living in the same time as people in the future. For them, there is no time, and they don't know that they're influenced. They can't see the people in modern times. They have no idea. They don't know that currently living people in the 21st century are seeing them because they can't see the 21st century people. But in this case, this woman could. And she fell in love with the rocket scientist. This was a first for me. And she was so in love with him that she scared away all the girlfriends. And her, shameless hussy who has hair like that. I mean, she was such a character. And she died because she was out fixing the chickens, or they barely kept any livestock, because if the Yankees didn't take, if the Northern soldiers didn't take what she had, then the Southern soldiers took it. Either army needed food, so they just robbed all the farmers. How this woman managed to survive for 5 years of civil war is just remarkable. But she cut herself, the wound got infected, and she died. And she got up, not realizing she was dead, and she watched her daughters bury her. That was her first clue. They buried her. So she watched her daughters die. She watched time pass, which again is very unusual. And when she did that, she was finally able to see this man, and she just loved him. She loved what he wore. She said, he ain't slopping no hogs in them fine get up, you know. And her syntax, her speech, and these ghost books are all audiobooks, and I do the voices of these characters because some of them are just amazing characters. And she left the light on for him. She said, he thinks he's fixed it, but I turn that light on for him every night. And so I checked back several times, and there wasn't anybody else there on that property. Her daughters crossed into the light, and she saw them cross into the light, but she didn't want to go. She said, I survived the Civil War, and then I died. I just want to have me some fun. Okay. Okay. And I said, but I know you want to have some fun, but it's over. Aren't you awfully tired? She says, yeah, I am. And I brought an angel in, and I wrapped this beautiful shawl around her that gave her some warmth and some healing, because there's a coldness to death. And then the angel sort of opens the doorway, and she saw her grandparents, she saw her daughters, and she said, I see my grandma, I see my grandmammy. And she, runs, and she's gone. I mean, bam, she's just gone. So I checked, and the place was clear. And so then I called the rocket scientist back. And he said, what'd you find? What'd you find? So I told him the story. And he said, well, it must be true, because the light was not on for me the last week. When I come in, it's like the house is empty, like there was someone here, and now they're gone. But I don't believe in ghosts. I want you to know, I don't believe in ghosts. That was the story of the rocket scientist.
Okay. So let's see. Are you up for doing an experiment live with me or no?
I don't do that.
You don't do that. Okay.
No. One, it takes a lot of energy. And two, I just don't do that.
Okay. Cool. I was just, gonna do like a live demo to see. I just want to ask you, like, tell me something about me.
Yes, but I don't do that, because I don't do readings. If someone has a spiritual problem, then we set up a time and they tell me what the issue is. And then together we go find the cause of it. And I mean, there's a lot of things you can tell about a person simply by all the different elements of their body language, but it isn't necessarily good for the person. And a psychic has enormous influence on another person, because the individual believes what the psychic says, even if the psychic can be wrong. They will give more power to a psychic than the psychic deserves.
Okay. So there's nothing you can tell me about me.
Other than you love your children.
Well, of course I love my children. I mean...
No. I mean, a lot of people who don't love their children. Believe me, you love your children. They're foremost in your mind all the time. And it's like they live in your heart to such a degree that you couldn't explain it to somebody else.
Well, thank you. Well, I thought all moms do.
No, all moms don't. I have had thousands of clients whose mothers didn't love them and allowed them to be hideously abused. And like my daughters-in-law, who are wonderful mothers, and I watch how they love, my grandchildren, women who mother and love their children, to me, should be afforded the highest respect and accolades, because so many people do not know how to love, nor do they truly love their children. And we have a terrible situation I'm unfortunately close to, where the mother abandoned her children. She never bathed them. Their teeth are rotting in their heads. It's a disaster. And we're seeing this is an epidemic. So to meet a woman who genuinely loves her children and you just wear it on you, that's about as much of a reading as I would do.
Oh, thank you. It was good to know. Thank you. Okay, so I want to talk about your books and the reaction. I looked at some, the reviews. The reviews are good on Amazon and other stuff, but did you get any negative reaction from the skeptics? And
Yes,
what
I
was
had one person. There's one review where this person said, this couldn't possibly happen. This can't possibly be true. She couldn't possibly have that ability. So yes, there was one review like that.
and how did that make you feel?
A person's entitled to their opinion.
Okay.
And something that I said in the book hit this person at a core level, and it angered them because there was something about it that rang truer and violated their beliefs, and they were mad at me for that.
It's interesting. I think about what you tell me. So my first novel was about reincarnation. My second novel that I just finished, I'm looking for a publisher, is about a woman who sees the future, and her husband doesn't know her. Because that's why I'm asking you this question. And there was another novel that I haven't finished about a cursed building. And if you noticed, I'm not showing you this, I'm wearing the evil eye.
Yeah. Evil eye
But,
protection. Yeah. I have one of those too.
Yeah. But, and I just keep thinking, why do I only write about these topics, and that's just the only topic I write about. I never experienced anything, but that's the only thing I think about.
Well, let me tell you a story that might help you understand. That when I was, I guess, five years old, my mother watched a show called Art Linkletter. This is in the 50s.
Okay.
I'm really old. And he had a family from India on his show. Well, I'd never seen anyone from India. So I was, I'm this little kid and I'm watching this. I'm 5.
Okay.
And they had a little girl, and she might have been, I don't know, 6 or 7 at the time. And this was her story. From the moment she was born, she talked about her family in another village.
Yeah.
And she went on and on and on about this family and her husband and all her children, and she missed them and she died too early. And this is from the moment she could talk. She was so upset that she died and came back. So finally, to just get her to stop, to prove her wrong, when she was 5, they took her to the village she claimed that she came from. And she found her house. And she knocked on the door and she identified her husband and her children. And the husband, it's one thing to talk about reincarnation, to have it as a belief system. It's a whole different ball game to come face to face with someone you used to be married to, and they're 5 years old. It's a non sequitur in your brain.
Yeah.
And he said, "What did you die of?" And she told him what she died of. I don't remember what it was. And he said, "Well, she buried her jewels and nobody knows where they are." And the child dug them up in the backyard. So they were all convinced. And it's like, now what? Okay, you're 5 years old. You can't raise these children. You came back in 5 years from your death. That's a really, really fast reincarnation. The average reincarnation cycle in the heaven world is 152 years. That's partly why there are so many people on Earth. So your concepts of reincarnation and or premonitions are really, really important, because what you're tapping into, in my opinion, is part of the universal mind. There are some events that are going to happen, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. There are some events that are going to happen, but they can be changed. You can mitigate them, or you can stop those events. And I experienced that repeatedly. That's why in Ghost Book 3, I wrote about several of those events where I saw my husband's death. Clearly, I knew he was dying. He was going to die. And these are the circumstances. But nobody said, okay, at 4:00 on this day, he's going to wear this and he's going to die that day. Premonitions don't work like that. And what you're trying to get people to understand, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that these things happen. You might write it in a novel, but these things are real. That's why ghost stories from the ghost point of view is nonfiction. These things happened. So when you're writing about it, you're opening people's eyes to possibilities. You're awakening people to potentialities. And you're helping people understand that if they have that happen to them, don't ignore it. pay attention to the best of your ability. Does that make any sense?
It does, yeah, because one of the characters, she also sees the way people die, and well, I'm kind of ruining the plot of the novel now, but like she tries to stop some of them, but she can't. Like she cannot stop the bad things from happening.
Well, let me offer you this. In Greek mythology, there's something called the Cassandra syndrome.
Cassandra syndrome? Okay.
The Cassandra syndrome. I actually thought about writing a book about this, but I've got 3 more to write, and I'm not going to write that one. In Greek mythology, the Cassandra syndrome,
I'm writing it down. Yeah.
The woman Cassandra,
okay,
Cassandra, the Cassandra syndrome. She had the ability to see the future, but her curse was that no one would believe her. And you see this with a lot of psychics. This is going to happen, but somebody says, no, that's not true, but it is. And you watch it, you can predict, and you watch it happen. And sometimes you can stop it. I stopped my brother's death, and I stopped my husband's death several times. But other events, there wasn't anything I could do. I mean, whatever was going to happen was going to happen. You can also predict positive events, things that are going to happen, and you can see them coming, and you can, write it down, and they happen, and you're going, wow, it's not always disaster. So those are, if you're going to write a novel, sometimes fabulous things happen that you can see coming.
So do you think it was a coincidence that you and I are talking and I'm writing a book about it? Do you believe in coincidence?
No, I believe in connection. I believe in synchronicity, not coincidence.
Okay.
Because it also has to do with spiritual resonance and frequency.
Okay. I get a lot of requests for my podcasts, tons. And I was drawn to yours and because of the ghost and the psychic elements to it, because it's a personal interest of mine. So how do your friends feel about it? I'm sure they know now, because you're pretty vocal about it. Or do you have many friends, or do they shy away from, maybe you make me feel uncomfortable about themselves? Like how does the friendship dynamic work?
No one's ever asked me that question.
Remember, I'm the journalist, so I have to ask.
Well, I think that's a great question. And I have friends I've had for 30 some years.
Okay.
And they know what I do. I'm not going to hide it. And I've helped everybody in some way. I have real estate agents. I've had, we buy and sell houses. When you're in the military, you move. And I've had real estate agents, and I was really vocal about who I am, what I do. I'm not going to shy away from it because I'm not ashamed of it. And it means that I can help you. I mean, my neighbors know what I do. We moved from San Diego. We had to get out of California. Oh my God. And we moved to Washington State. And so I was, careful till I could, look at the lay of the land. And in San Diego, I had a group called Light Times, and people would come and go. I had hundreds of people come to these. Sometimes they were weekly, sometimes they were monthly meetings where we discussed every aspect of metaphysics, from time, feng shui, karma, color, auras, chakra systems. I would teach class after you name it in metaphysics. I was teaching that class. I did it for 30 years. That's why I have relatable knowledge in so many fields. And I just had people coming out of the woodwork. My neighbors knew what I was. They knew what I did. And some of them thought I was some sort of a weird witch. A lot of my crew, when I was in the Navy, figured it out, but I certainly didn't advertise it there. I just had an uncanny ability to know things. And so I have had very, very Christian friends say to me, I don't think we could ever be friends. And I said, well, how do you know? Let's have lunch. There's one particular lady, and she said, I'm Christian. We couldn't ever be friends. And I said, well, could we have lunch? And it wasn't what she expected. So we had a 3-hour lunch, and she's now one of my dearest friends.
Wow.
She doesn't have to believe what I'm offering. She's free. It's okay.
So people who think you're or a witch, or sorry for using that term, but does it affect you? Does it hurt you? How do they change their mind, or they immediately shun you? Like this lady changed her mind, but have you ever got so much hatred that you felt unsafe?
Twice, yes,
Okay.
twice. I was working with a woman whose husband was super wealthy,
Okay.
and he was extremely abusive. And in the process, I got her to stand up to him because I'm very practical about how I approach things. She accepting abuse has gone on for life after life after life. And you know your abuser. A lot of people, most people know their murderers from past lives. And it forced him to have respect for her because she held her ground. But his rage toward me was unbelievable. She did go back to him. He changed. He stopped abusing her, which is remarkable. And he stopped saying terrible things about me. We're never going to be friends. And I had a neighbor who was pretty vile. But when he died, I crossed him over. He was just awful. He was a bail bondsman. Awful guy. But it's not for me to judge. I just crossed him over. What happens in the heaven world is not my job, beyond my pay grade. So I let that go. When you do this work, you don't judge who's in front of you. I cross over murderers. I cross over mass murderers because you don't want them to reincarnate and do it again and again and again. If you cross them over, that karmic clock stops.
So what did you do for the Marine? It's for the Navy. Sorry. So you served at the Navy. What did you do for them?
I was a terrorist expert.
Okay.
And I did a lot of different things. In 20 years, I didn't do terrorism for 20 years, but I did whatever I worked for the submarine force, and they eat you for lunch if you're not a really strong personality. And I was the first female instructor in the history of submarine school, and I taught very classified things. And we were in Italy, and I had the security of 7 transmitter and receiver sites, and then then I worked for submarine training facilities, and then I was the assistant chief of staff for force physical security, anti-terrorism, and law enforcement for Commander Submarine Force, U.S. Atlantic Fleet. And I had 86 submarines, 9 tenders, and 3 submarine bases, and the senior Jewish admiral in the Navy to protect from terrorist attack.
Did you use your abilities to combat terrorism? Did you use that?
When I was in the Navy, no, because the job was so dynamic. I had to outfit submarines and tenders. I had to do very practical physical things because these submarines were pulling into foreign ports, and I had to protect them in any port of call without offending or upsetting, the host country. You have to be respectful of the country you're in. And so my job was to figure out what can I do that will give this submarine some level of protection in layers. And they sent me to terrorist school, and I learned things I wish I hadn't known. But one of the things I learned in terrorist school was how heavily the CIA used remote viewers.
Yeah,
I have the events.
I used that in my book. Yeah, I used that in my book. Yeah, so I know about it.
Yeah, so whether you're looking at someone who is
can you tell us a bit how? Yeah, can you tell us a bit how the CIA used remote viewers for anyone who's listening?
When I went to terrorist school, I was there with CIA agents, ambassadors, drug enforcement agents. I mean, the room was packed. Brought in a guest speaker, and the guest speaker was General Dozier. When we lived in Italy, General Dozier was working on a NATO staff, and he was kidnapped by the Red Brigade. It was a terrorist organization in the 70s. And, we were living in Naples, Italy at the time. Well, to see this guy who I knew was kidnapped while I was there, standing in front of me, talking, was fascinating. And he says, my wife warned me. She warned me she had a bad feeling. Psychic sense, wink, 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 wake up. And I didn't listen to her. Shame on you. And I was kidnapped. Well, the CIA employed remote viewers to locate him in time and space. And I think he was found in Milan somewhere. I can't remember exactly where he was found, but I think it was Milan. It was not Florence or Venice. And just as the Carabinieri were getting close, the remote viewers identified the exact location in time and space, which is very hard to do, I will tell you. Finding a missing person for a remote viewer is extremely difficult. I've been asked to do it, but it's hard. It's very difficult. But they did. So what the CIA came up with and the Carabinieri came up with matched exactly. And he was so astounded, and so was the CIA, that they were actually able to find a person, because that's not how they routinely use remote viewers. And so they used them to look at weapon systems and what's inside buildings, or that kind of thing. And so I thought, okay, well, that's a very, very interesting skill set to have, not realizing that that skill set would come full bore for me and that I would be able to do the same thing. So I didn't realize that that's what was going to happen. But what happened in terrorist school is it doesn't matter whether you're in a physical body and you have terrorism, or you are looking at terrorism from an unseen source. They're both unseen. You don't know what's happening. You don't understand what's going on around you. That's why people think they're cursed, or they think there's a dark being, or there's a dark intelligence. It's spiritual terrorism.
Did your boss know about your ability?
No, they didn't.
Would that have jeopardized your job if they knew?
No, a lot of people thought I was just unusually intelligent.
And you are probably. I mean,
unusually hardworking, and I had an uncanny ability to understand what was required. They gave me, they said, figure out how to protect all these submarines. And we have submarines of all different lengths and sizes and capabilities. And so designing systems that protected, a ballistic missile submarine from a fast attack submarine to a submarine rescue ship to a submarine tender, the dynamic of it was astounding. And I put 9 devices on surface ships and 7 on submarines, and I did it in 3.5 years, which had never been done before. I mean, actually deploying them on the ships, and they're in use today. So if you go on military bases, my concepts, my ideas are there for everybody to see.
So
I had a lot of opposition.
So, I have to ask the question. You're a psychic and you're a submarine expert. What happened to Ocean Gate?
Just, stupidity 101.
What happened?
Arrogance.
What happened to the people inside the ship?
They were killed instantly. The submarine imploded. They were killed instantly. When you have U.S. submarines have something called HY1, I think it's up to 130. It could be up to 140 steel.
Okay.
And that's the gauge of steel that surrounds the hull of a submarine.
Okay.
When you have that strength and you've got all these additional layers, you have these super perfect welds on that hull. I worked in the shipyard, electric boat division. I worked for the supervisor of shipbuilding. And so I got to see firsthand how you build a submarine. It's jaw-dropping. I mean, what an education. And when something is repaired, they do test after test. They do pressure tests. They do sound testing and shockwave testing so that they know if there are any weak areas for that submarine to go down. And U.S. submarines don't go as deep as Ocean Gate did. The Russians use double-hulled titanium submarines. So they use titanium as the outer hull and an inner hull, which the U.S. doesn't do. But the Russians have had problems with their reactors in the past. So your propulsion system has to be really, really good. And you always, both the Russians and the Americans, the French and the British, all have a very sophisticated communication system. Even if you're submerged to test depth, which I can't say what that is, even if you're submerged to that, you still have a way to communicate. So if you didn't ever inquire what is required to take a submarine to depths of that level, and you don't understand the basic physics of pressures that go down to 13,000 feet, you're at 2+ miles below the surface of the water, and the pressure on a hull, and you have what's called cycling. Every time you submerge and you come up, that hull is going to give a little bit. It's called cycling. Aircraft know that they make, whether it's Boeing or whoever makes an airplane, the fuselage expands and contracts every time they take off and they go up to a certain altitude and they land. That causes stress fractures in the metal. And it creates an exhaustion in whatever material your hull or your fuselage is made from. And Ocean Gate had already been up and down repeatedly. So, and remember, the U.S. submarine force has an astonishingly pristine track record. We've lost 2. We lost Thresher and Scorpion. Thresher was on sea trials, which they came out of the shipyard and there was a problem, and it went down with all hands, including all of the contractors. And Scorpion was a fast attack that was lost off the Azores. So, and that was both of those were lost before the 70s. Those were lost in the 60s. So the testing, the care, and the meticulous nature of watching how the submarine force does business for 20 years. Not only can I tell you, these are some of the finest men you'd ever want to work with, some of the best patriots on the planet, and they do their job if they never fire a weapon in anger. That's a successful mission. And they make sure that when you deliberately submerge your ship, you better doggone well know everything about it, including all the physics that go with it.
So, wow. Did you see that coming as a psychic or no?
I don't look for that. I just looked at this and I'm thinking to myself, have you lost your mind? You don't really understand the sea.
Okay.
And no submariner in their right mind would have gone down in that. I mean, I know these men. My husband spent 42 years at sea, half of it in submarines and on surface ships, and he was captain of an oil rig and various rigs. So when you understand a little bit and about how the ocean works, you have to respect the ocean because it is not forgiving.
Have you ever worked with the police? There is this show 10 years ago or more called, what was it called? Medium, if you remember it.
Oh, I've seen all her episodes. I had
what was her name? Yeah, I love this show.
I love the show. Patricia Arquette starred.
Yes, Patricia Arquette. And she worked with the police. For us, we watched it. It's fiction, like it never happens, right?
No, it did. That's based on a true story. That did happen.
That's true.
Her story was true. It's the Ghost Whisperer that is a fiction.
So have you
even that show has some things that are accurate.
So have you ever worked with the police? Have you ever been approached by the police to solve a murder or a mystery or something like this?
No. I have gone to the police with information on a couple of occasions, and they don't believe a psychic. You get shut down every time. In Ghost Stories from the Ghost Point of View, Volume 3, there is an astonishing story, and I'm not going to give this one away, about how I sidestepped the police, and I couldn't believe what I was asked to remote view a location, and what I found in the location was so jaw-dropping for me. But if you call the police, they shut you down because you're a psychic. They don't care. So I found a way around it, and it was very helpful. That's all I'll say. It was very, very helpful.
So why did they listen to the woman in the show Medium if it's based on true story? And did they stop?
Because they listened to her, and it was really hard for them because her ability to see things means that she's seeing things without a search warrant. Think about that.
Yeah.
She can look at a location without a search warrant
Correct.
She can see things that they can't prove in court are real. So
Okay.
if you're using a psychic, and a psychic says, "Oh, I see this," then, which is actually what happened to me, the owner actually provided permission of the location that I saw, because that had to be requested first
Okay.
before the police could go in. And she was not always sensitive, and the show dramatized, so we don't know what the truth is. She didn't, what bothered me was in that case, she wasn't studying how to enhance her ability. She had the ability, but she didn't always understand it. So if you're going to have psychic ability, for God's sake, study. Don't just accept, I have a gift. Get past that. Get past your ego. It's not about you or what you can do, but what's your service? And how can you do your service to the best of your ability and sort of stay in the background? You don't necessarily want to be out there, because just because you have an ability doesn't mean you can solve a case. It doesn't mean that. And it doesn't mean that you can give exact information. You can give vague information, because sometimes that's all you get.
Okay. So, okay. I wanna, like, before we conclude, I wanna ask about your publishing journey. I noticed you self-published. Did you try traditional publishers and they turned you down, or you just went immediately to the self-publishing route?
In 2009, when I wanted to publish the grief book, Lightworker's Guide to Healing Grief, Amazon's capacity for this didn't really exist in a way that an ordinary person could do it. And so I looked for a publisher, and I only asked one publisher, which was the Edgar Cayce Center in Virginia Beach. I don't know if you're familiar with Edgar Cayce.
No.
He was the premier psychic in the United States for years.
Okay.
He died in 1964. He was the sleeping prophet, and they have a center called the Association for Research and Enlightenment. Okay. And Cayce was a remarkable, we could do a whole show just on Cayce, but they have a publishing arm. So I was in Virginia, and we drove over, and I gave them a manuscript, and 24 hours later, I had a contract. And so they published my first book. But after they print 2,000 copies and they sell 2,000 copies, they take the book off the market. And so by 2010, Amazon is really up and running. So they said, well, we're going to take the book off the market. And I said, well, then I want my rights back. And they said, in the history of the ARE, we've never had anybody ask for their rights back. And I said, well, I'm going to be the first, because I want an ebook, and I want the rights to the ebooks. And I was the very first ebook they ever did. So they sent me a document so I got my rights back for ebooks and print on demand. And so I'm the only writer who ever did that. And I realized that a publisher is only going to push your book for 6 months. If you don't own the rights, I've been selling that grief book. When I got my rights back in 2010, I've been selling that book year after year after year, all this time. So why would I want to give a publisher the right to publish it for so many copies and then nothing else after that, when you can continue to talk about your book or go on a speaking circuit? And so after that, I had some help, but I learned how to self-publish. It was a huge new skill set. So now I format all of my print-on-demand books, format all my ebooks. I do all my own audiobooks, and I do all my own editing for audiobooks. I do all of it. It's a lot of work, but I do it.
Well, remember, you're very intelligent because of...
I don't know if I'm that intelligent, but I don't want anybody else to do those audiobooks.
How are the books selling?
I have never had a month without royalties since 2010. I've never had a month without royalties. And the podcasts enable me to put these books out globally. I do podcasts in Australia. I did one in Austria 2 weeks ago. and England. And I mean, I'm selling all over the world right now. And
So
I
you,
have,
sorry.
and
So
with Amazon, you have global opportunities, which with a publisher, you may or may not have.
So your best, because I also like to, we have to conclude, but I like to help authors as well. So your best publishing tip was like what worked for you was the podcast, was the best marketing that helped your books? Like how did you do it? Like I struggle with selling my book.
Well, that's your hardest part. Writing, formatting, getting it out there
is the easiest. Yeah.
That's the easiest, ironically. But doing podcasts is a really good way. A lot of people would have a stack of books and they go to all these speaking circuits and try to sell their books there. And you're always, toting all these books all over the place. And I don't do a speaking circuit. I do podcasts because with the digital age, a lot of people are in love with audiobooks.
True.
And you only make a 40% royalty with Audible if you do everything yourself. If you don't, you might make 10%. And it's so much work, it's just not worth it. So looking at it from a financial, and I make twice the royalties in audiobooks that I do with everything else. And the more books you have out there, you become known as an author. And I have some people who buy every book I write. So, and the audiobooks help me a great deal. My websites, when people are looking up, they look up ghosts, mine pops up. So pushing it from that viewpoint, and I had my own podcast for a year. I did a radio show for a year. I did a radio show in New York for I don't know how many months. We had millions listening. So I have royalties from all over Amazon UK and Amazon India and Amazon Australia and New Zealand. And I mean, all over the world, I have royalties from these. I mean, I'm not saying this thousands of dollars a month, but month after month after month after month, and they're growing.
Wow,
so
good for you.
It works for me. It works for me.
And now, like the pun intended. Did you see that coming?
Let's just say that somebody else saw it coming and helped me get to a place where I could do this. I have a lot of help from the other side. So
wow.
I don't do this alone.
Can I hire some of your helpers to help me with the book? Or no?
I'm not a person who ever has writer's block. I mean, they wake me up at night and say, make sure you put this in this book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, you just hit the lead. Now you buried the lead. You tell me this now at the end of the show.
Sorry.
But okay, well, thank you very much. This has been a blast. I loved it. And I said, like now I'm going to go back and I think I'm going to just revise my novel that I'm about to publish and just add some stuff based on our conversation because it's been just fascinating. And I'm so glad we met you, and I hope you stay in touch. And for anyone who's reading, who's listening or watching, you can find Tina Erwin's book on Amazon and on her website. Anything else you would like to say before I conclude, Tina?
I would just like to offer people that on ghosthelpers.com, there are all these wonderful crossing over prayers and videos. And believe me, this is going to be the compassion you will want for yourself when death eventually comes. So, Natasha, thank you with all my heart for having me on your show. I've had a blast. You asked super good questions. So thank you with all my heart.
Thank you. It's been a blast. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Read and Write with Natasha. I'm your host, Natasha Tynes. If today's episode inspired you in any way, please take the time to review the podcast. Remember to subscribe and share this podcast with fellow book lovers. Until next time, happy reading, happy writing.